Okay, we are live.
Good morning, Bay Area. Good afternoon, East Coast of the Turtle Island and the Western Hemisphere and Latin America and the Caribbean. Good evening, Palestine, Gaza, Lebanon, and wherever you are, resilient people uh, receiving blows by genocidal forces and standing strong and to the word. Thank you for joining us today on a discussion, a critical open classroom initiated by Ahmed Studies and Teaching Palestine and co-joined with the Palestine Arab and Muslim Caucus of the California Faculty Association and co-joined by several caucuses and colleagues from several caucuses who we'll introduce in a minute from the California Faculty Association. We are very honored to have you here today, but before we start any of our proceedings, we begin our traditional tradition commemoration of the land acknowledgement, which we do not do as an exercise, a cliche exercise. We do it with our conviction and our commitment, and we turn it over to our colleague, comrade, Professor Anthony Ratliff, who is co-chair of the PAM caucus and also professor of Africana Studies, and we will be posting the bios of our participants in the chat online. So please go ahead, Professor Ratliff.
I can you post it? I thought there'd be a post of it. I'm really apologize. I don't.
Oh,
I can
you
get
are,
mine.
yeah,
Yeah. Do
go
we
ahead.
have
Yeah,
one?
yeah, you can give yours. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay, just 1 second. I'm sorry. Apologize about that. All right. So appreciate the opportunity to be here. As Dr. Abdulhadi said, my name is Dr. Anthony Ratcliffe, and I'll be reading the land acknowledgement. So, with great respect, the CSU acknowledges the Tongva people as the traditional caretakers of Tongvangar, the Tongva world, including the Los Angeles Basin, South Channel Islands, San Gabriel and Pomona Valleys, and portions of Orange, San Bernardino, and Riverside counties. I'm at Cal State LA, so I'll say where I'm at. Cal State LA is located within these lands. As an institution located on unceded Tongva land, we pay our respects to the ancestors, elders, and our relatives, relations past, present, and emerging. Consistent with our values of community and diversity, we have a responsibility to acknowledge and make visible the university's relationship to Native people. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold Cal State LA and other universities more accountable to the needs of American Indian peoples. And this prepared by Dr. Kimberly Robinson Muskoki and Tongva Elder Julia Bugani Presente.
Thank you, Dr. Ratliff, and I will turn over to Dr. Lida Ramos if you would like to add, or you are okay with that. You are living in the same area. Please go ahead. And
Yes,
Dr.
I'd like
Lida Ramos is from Chicanas Latinx Caucus of the California Faculty Association, also member of the PAM, Palestine Arab Muslim Caucus, and also a professor of Chicano Studies and an artist. And the bio will be also posted online at on the chat as well. Rose, go ahead. Yeah.
yes, I'm in LA, and so we're on Tongva Gabrielino land, and also connected, I think, to the film is the freedom of Leonard Peltier. So I just want to be grateful for that liberation after over 50 years incarcerated.
Thank you. And to add that Leonard Peltier was captured by the U.S. federal forces at the Battle of Wounded Knee, and he was a member of the American Indian movement. And we celebrate that, and we demand the freedom of many, many other sisters and brothers who continue to be captivated, such as Brother Mumia Abu Jamal, and so many other prisoners who continue to be captive in U.S. jails, as well as thousands of Palestinian prisoners. And we can see before our eyes the battle for the return of Palestinian prisoners. Over 10,000 were arrested in the last since October 7th in the West Bank. There are thousands who are continue to be arrested, and we see and we learn about their stories as they continue to be released. And actually, as a matter of fact, it is one of them is the subject of the film that we will be discussing now with our comrade and our brother Konrad Aderer. I will add my land acknowledgement that my own university, San Francisco State University, sits on the stolen land of the Ohlone and the Ramaytush people, and this is a land that must be returned and must be repatriated and rematriated. And I should add that whenever I say rematriated, Google rejects that and says it's a mistake. When I say rematriated, they only accept repatriated. So we do know where that language is. And with that, we demand the land back with the same spirit that we demand the land back for Palestine. So this is not an empty land acknowledgement and is not a performative act, as has been the case in some academic quarters, not in all of them. And I want to see if my comrade and brother Konrad Aderer, maybe you would like to add something to this exercise of ours that we have started engaging in our classes and our practices in our union.
Yes, my name is Konrad Aderer. I'm sitting on Merrick and U.S.C. Lenape land. I would love to learn more about those histories, but I don't know. I moved in the last 2 years, but I'm glad that you're still maintaining this acknowledgement.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we will be posting also the bios of everybody who's participating here, and we will be parsing out some of the histories and some of the context as we go along. We do not bombard everybody immediately with everything, but we also have a tradition that we inspire and we borrow from people who are in liberation movements around the world. Most immediately for me, the Palestinian, that we always start by honoring the fallen in all the struggles for liberation, for freedom and justice in the United States, in Gaza, in Lebanon, in Puerto Rico, in Hawaii, people who have fought in Mexico, people who have fought in the streets of the U.S., in Kashmir, in South Africa, all around us here in the Pacific, anywhere in the world. And we actually start most recently with mentioning, at the very least in the last few days, most recently, the martyrs in the Ibrahimi Mosque who were killed 31 years ago by the Israeli doctor who was from Brooklyn, Baruch Goldstein, who went into the Ibrahimi Mosque in February and killed 29 worshippers in Al Khalil, which some people know Hebron. And instead of holding the culprit settler colonial Zionist mentality accountable, the world awarded Israel by an agreement called H1, H2, where the settlers in Hebron were actually awarded a large portion of Hebron, and that led to the closure of Palestinian stores and Palestinian commercial life, and awarded the settlers life on top of Hebron, where the settlers throw feces, urine, dirt, bombs, stones that lead to the damage and even the physical injury of Palestinians who are trying to live their lives on their own home. The other anniversary that we are commemorating is the martyr Aaron Bushnell, who was martyred here, a U.S. martyr for Palestine, a year ago outside the Israeli embassy in Washington. And Aaron Bushnell made it very clear, and in his resistance and his narrative of resistance, made it impossible for anybody to change his narrative and to make another narrative of psychological problems or disturbed mentally or anything of the sort. And he made it very clear why he set himself on fire, very much inspired by what happened in Vietnam in the struggle against the war in Vietnam, and that he kept saying free Palestine. And there is no way to change that narrative. And this is probably why his story continued to be shadow banned by the US media. And we honor him, and he has been honored as a martyr of the Palestinian movement by all Palestinians. And we Palestinians are vowing that his death and his passing is not going to be in vain. The last event that has happened recently was on Sunday, was the massive um, funeral for the Sheikh Hassan Nasrallah and Hashim Safiyuddin, who were leaders of Hezbollah in Lebanon, who were assassinated by Israel along with many. There are numbers that say million and a half. There is no way to figure out how many people, but we do know that people came from all over the world and all over Lebanon and all over Palestine to basically honor them and participate in their memorial, and say that it is not acceptable for Israel to assassinate. It's not acceptable to extinguish the people who lead our people. And I know my colleague Anthony is going to be discussing some of that. We will be talking about that around what's happened to the leadership here of movements around the world. So we want to mention them all, and we want to mention the killing that is continuing as we in before our eyes, of children, of elderly, and so on. And last but not least, last Friday was the anniversary of the martyrdom of the great leader and hero, Brother Malcolm X, Hajj Malik al-Shabazz, who was martyred here in the United States in the Audubon ballroom, which became now the Dr. Betty Shabazz and the Malcolm X hall. And he was martyred in the arms of Yuri Kochiyama, who was another Japanese organizer, fighter, who also was incarcerated in the concentration camps of the people, the Japanese people, who were rounded up and incarcerated in concentration camps in Second World War, which is the subject of Konrad Aderer's documentary that we will be talking about. The last comment I want to mention is that what is happening today in the context is that we see today in Jenin, in Tulkarem, in the Jenin camp, in the Tulkarem's Nur Shams camp, in Qabatia, in Nablus, my own hometown, in Nablus, many other places. There is battles. Israel is raiding with tanks, with fighter planes, with tanks for the first time since 2000, Aqsa Intifada. And there is displacement. At least 40,000 Palestinians have been displaced. That is continued displacement of the Palestinians, continued Nakba. And Nakba means the catastrophe of the Palestinians who were displaced in 1948 when Israel was founded, to make place for Zionist settlers, erase the land, to say that there is a land without a people, empty the land from Palestinian displacement. And this is some of the things that we're seeing today: displacement of people, picking them up, throwing them outside. And this is some of the things what we will be talking about. I'll mention them now. Some of the Trump's ideas to empty Gaza and create something called the Riviera of the Middle East, which we've seen in some of our countries around the world, like Puerto Rico, like Hawaii, like other colonized communities. And I'm just mentioning now to come back to them and discuss them in our discussion today. But so we want to start first with the topic of the film Enemy Alien. with Konrad Aderer. Start with Konrad Aderer to. Oh, before that, let me just make sure that we are offering gratitude for everybody who participated. First, with Konrad yourself, who came here to join us. First of all, offering your time and your talent free of charge, which is this is rare. You know that academics and creative artists and filmmakers, they always insist on a fee, on charging and so on. It's rarely that people agree to do that for free of charge. And Conrad is allowing us to screen the film and came on his own free. And we would really like to encourage everybody to go on the film and see where you can support Conrad with his new film that he is making. And we will continue posting that online and showing it. Incidentally, we showed the film right up to now for people who want to see it, because it's an amazing, I think, and we all think it's an amazing film, well done. Everybody really likes it. And I want to say, Conrad, that people in Gaza have seen it. People in Cuba have seen it. We send it to people in film festivals. So we will be seeing it again and discussing it in all sorts of places as well. So please support Conrad. Conrad also has been so generous to also say that he wants to dedicate some of the proceedings to the International Film Festival, Palestinian International Film Festival, or Return in Gaza, that are co-sponsoring our showing today and what we are doing. And they are doing it right from Khan Yunis, Gaza, the area that has been so destroyed and so plummeted. They're actually launching a film festival that is being shown all over the world. And so we will hear more and more about it. And they saw it and they really love the film. So we will be talking about more than that. So let's discuss. Let's talk about the film. Why you made the film? What is the message of the film? Just maybe some of the things. We also have questions for you. Professor Lida has, Professor Anthony has. I've seen the film so many times. Every year we show it on the day of Remembrance about the concentration camps in every single class. And I should say also, we are being joined by two classes of Dr. Omar Zaza, my colleague from San Francisco State University, Ahmed Studies, the class of Lives in Exile, Arabs and Muslims, was 9/11/2001, Arab and Arab American Identity. My class is Islamophobia, my class on Palestine, and my other class, Comparative Border Studies, Palestine and Mexico. So students are watching, taking notes, and will be writing about it. So I have questions, but I want you to talk about, why did you make the film? What's the film about? What's Enemy Alien? What is Enemy Alien? Why the title? So please go ahead, Conrad.
Thank you very much, Professor Rabab. Yes, well, there was, anyone who was in New York during this period when I was starting this film is familiar with the feeling of the aftermath of the horror of the attacks, and also the this drumbeat of violence and exclusion and detention and war that was just kind of unfolding from our politics. And so it was, I've almost forgotten that time, but then, when things happen like the pandemic and our current, what's going on with this administration, you remember those times of just fear and just upheaval. So that's the emotional place that it came out of. It took a while to find Farouk as a subject, because I was trying to follow different stories. I was just trying to find anyone, because basically at that moment, in the first months after the attack, there was about 1,200 Muslim immigrants who were swept off the street in this very chaotic, haphazard way, and they were treated as 9/11 detainees. Like, it gave this kind of legitimacy to their being picked up. But when, in the end, as the film explains, there was only one of them who supposedly was ever charged with a terrorism-related crime for crossing some border with a truck that had some some weapons in it. I mean, that was like the one thing that eventually came to light about this group. But nonetheless, our attorney general showed up, like periodically, and just claimed that these were really dangerous terrorists. And I had the chance to tell the story of the wife of one of them. Her name is Shokriya Yagi, and she herself came from Afghanistan as a refugee and got U.S. citizenship. And her husband was detained, and so I was following that story. But that, I wasn't able to follow that story to its conclusion because it just got too hard and for the family. So to tell a story like of anything like this when it's unfolding is very difficult, and you can see. And also, I documented the difficulty of telling Farouk's story because that was really a part of it. I mean, that excused my being in the film because, for one thing, I was starting off making films about people, like more traditional documentaries. I wasn't putting myself in them, and then people kept telling me I should tell my story, my background, and put myself as a character in the film. And I was resistant to that until really the story of Farouk became this really months and years long struggle to get him out of detention where he was illegally held. And it occurred to me, okay, as a filmmaker, I can definitely say something because things happened. There was counterterrorism agents who were interfering with just the ability to tell a story, and all those struggles I think were important. And then it became to me like an interesting way to include myself and to put my voice in, which was also a very awkward process. I was really starting as a filmmaker. That was my first film. So having your voice, even though I'd been an actor, like to put yourself as a character is just like a really big leap for someone who might not be, naturally inclined to do that. So, yeah, I mean, that was the world that it came out of. And, Farouk also as I'm talking like kind of almost impersonally of him as a subject, but, when you're a filmmaker, you have to talk about, you have to have certain terms for people. So, he was my subject. He was someone whose story I was telling, who allowed me to interview him, which amazingly, I'm amazed that I did some of these things because I feel that they would be a lot harder to do today, to get an interview with an immigrant detainee. I guess it's been done, but I almost never see them. I mean, in the proportion to how many immigrant detainees there are, I think it's very rare to see an interview with someone while they're in detention. I haven't seen a lot. And I suspect that's because once the Department of Homeland Security department was created, which if you're around, paying attention back then, you know that it used to be the INS, and then they created this thing called Homeland Security. So they pulled together a lot of their policies, but at that time it was a lot more chaotic. So maybe someone like me could slip in and get permission, which legally there should be no problem with that, right? Because anyone who's in prison or detention should be able to speak to the press. However, you can see from the story, and I'm sure many of your own work, that what's a constitutional right can be interfered with in many ways when you're dealing with prisons and agencies like Homeland Security. So you see some of that in the film too. So yeah, I mean, but I guess at the core, it was really important for me to go revisit my own family history because I'd only recently become keenly interested in a new way. I mean, I'd been aware of it in high school and I had a certain general picture of what happened, but I hadn't discussed it with my grandparents because I didn't think that they would want to, or I thought it would be too touchy of a subject. So I'd put it off. So really it was 9/11 that gave me a new consciousness and a new, urge to just go into my family history and find out more, some of the questions which I had, which is how did this happen? What was going on in your life at the time? And and what was it like really. So, and that's a big part of the film is my driving from New York to Ohio to talk to my grandmother, and then I think that's an important moment in the film, and and it also was a real. It came in the story and in the actual unfolding of events. It came at a really crucial time because it came at a time when Farouk's detention case seemed really hopeless because he was completely he had been taken from regular immigrant detention to solitary confinement indefinitely in New York, Pennsylvania. So that was a move that the uh, the agencies involved took to basically remove him from his support system. And I'm sure that happens all the time with any immigrant detainee who has any kind of support from family or activists or legal help, right? And so that's what was going on in his case at the time. And then out of a kind of helplessness and just despair and a needing of an emotional recharge in a way, I went to see my grandma, and so that's when that story happens. But I suspect that might be some questions some of you have. I haven't got a clear finish to what I'm saying right now. So I'm happy to hear from any of you who have some questions or want to follow up with me.
Yeah, thank you, Conrad. Yes, we do have a lot of questions for you, but we wanted to also just give some history, just to make sure that the history of just a very short synopsis of history, the laws are in there, and then we will go into the other histories we want to do, and then come back to have questions for you because Dr. Lida has questions, Dr. Anthony, I have questions for you about what happened and also engagement with you. But I wanted to just make sure that we remember the histories that have happened. That this is the Alien and Sedition Acts. There were 4 laws in 1798. This is in 1798 that were restrictions to immigration and speech. The Naturalization Act of 1798 that increased the requirement to seek citizenship. It was repealed in 1802. Then there was the Alien Friends Act of 1798 that allowed the president to imprison and deport non-citizen. It has expired, this one. Then there is the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. This is the one on the basis of which Farouk was imprisoned, and it gave the president and the Japanese people additional power to detain non-citizens during time of war. And it's still in effect. This is still in effect. And then there was the Sedition Act of 1798, criminalized false and malicious statements about the federal government. This has expired. But then on April 1st, 1942, as your film says, and I'm, by the way, doing this as a professor for my students, President Roosevelt signed the Order 9066, and it was based on legislation that was approved on February 19th, 1942. That's why we say February 19th is the day of remembrance, invoking the Enemy Act, by which all Japanese and German, Italians, but Japanese also, not just Japanese, Americans were rounded. So, for example, a few years ago, it was the Japanese from Peru and from other countries were rounded, and our colleagues in California were their families were rounded in Crystal City in Texas, and they invited a few of us non-Japanese to go with them to Crystal City. It was very interesting because Crystal City was a city of mostly Mexicans. What do you want to say, Mexican Americans, if wherever you define the border, and was very interesting because the Mexican residents of Crystal City were very hospitable to the Japanese, and the guards were not. So there were Japanese who were saying the Mexican people were smuggling tortillas to them, and they were told that no, you shouldn't be doing this. These are enemies. There are foreigners. We don't like them. And the Mexicans were saying, we don't care. We were just, so there was this solidarity among people, and on a sort of like on the down low, not public, but they didn't feel that. So there was a lot of the stuff, a lot of this. So this was lasted for so many years, and also the properties were taken. We heard a lot of stories from the people in the Bay Area, for example, because we work very closely with many groups and who have lost their property, have been isolated, have been shunned. But the other thing for us is that so is and like for this was also, let's, even if we go back, and no, if we go forward before that, I wanted to also mention something that's really important, and we'll come back to it. In 1987, and seven Palestinians and a Kenyan partner of one of them were arrested by 250 agents of FBI, INS, Secret Service. They were handcuffed and shackled to LA prison, accused of terrorism for distributing a magazine, just a magazine, of a major PLO faction, and labeled as a terrorist. And then the newspaper said alien terrorists, this is terrorism hits LA. There was a plan that was during the Reagan administration revealed, that was devised by the Vice President George Herbert Bush, called Alien Terrorists and Undesirables. And it called for the creation of camps for citizens of seven Arab countries and Iran, to create camps to hold these citizens in camps similar to those in which Japanese were held in the Second World War. And one of the, and we know at that time, I was very active on this Committee for Justice to defend the Palestinians. We called the LA. It became very, very well known case. And it was said that Oakdale, Louisiana, at that time, one of the mayors said, "Oh, this is really great because they will be in the desert. They're used to it," which is very interesting because all the citizens from these countries actually came from, like, coastal areas and so on, the Palestinians. And they were saying, yeah, it looks very cool, but it was very similar. They were drawing inspiration from a very shameful act against the Japanese people in the Second World War. And now, this is what a few days ago, the Trump administration already started instituting against the immigrants here. So this is something that continues 1798 in 2000, post to 2011. The laws that were passed after 9/11, and after 9/11 2001, a lot of them were inspired by the laws that were taken against the LA8. Of course, compilation. So we know Patriot Act 1, Patriot Act 2. So there is a lot of histories that many of our students do not know, and many of our communities do not know. And what's going on today is a deliberate act of collective amnesia, to erase all of the stuff from our books, to erase a lot of the stuff from our educational curriculum. And I know this is, my colleagues are also wanted to jump in and to that, basically to make us not know this, because if we don't know this, we say this is something new. This is something spontaneous. It's just coming up. What's going on? And to basically mobilize all by the act of hegemony, all our communities against one community, and say these are the enemy alien. These are the ones that's like, there comes the Russians. There comes this. There comes that. These are the enemies. These are, these are the ones who are going to be pollute the community and so on. They're the danger and so on. We really need to get rid of them. What was it yesterday? Was it the new Secretary of Homeland Security, that said that we will need to get rid of the scumbags or something about this is the terminology that people in power are using. And if they are using it not as a slip of the tongue, what's being done in closed room as well. So this is why also it's really important to also put your film in a historical context and say that this is something that's really, really important. We're so grateful that you have it in order to pass it on to us. So I'm going to now to throw it back at my colleagues to come, like Lida was first. I'm Professor Dr. Ramos, and then Dr. Ratliff, and we'll come back. Unmute yourself, Lida. Go ahead.
Actually, Dr. Ratcliffe is going first.
I'll go first. Yeah, I appreciate that and appreciate being here, Dr. Abdulhadi. And, Konrad, your film has definitely raises so many. I just remember 2001, being in Baltimore at the time, and just sort of all the how quickly things shifted, right? I think it's, you realize how there's a lot of people who want to argue that today, what's happening is not, this is not American. This is not what Trump is proposing for our undocumented folks, this is not what America stands for. But if you actually look at American history, this is pretty much all it's done. This is like some of the major laws that have been passed have been around exclusion, right, around deportation, and that's the bad thing is, and people have been able to push back against that, and I think that's what we're gonna have to do again now. But the idea that this is like a new thing, this is not true, right? This has been the way, as Rabab said, going all the way back to the 1700s, right, with the Alien Enemies Act, right? That's definitely a starting point. But even after that time, I think one thing that you see a lot of anti-immigrant acts going on in the 1800s, like specifically against the Chinese and other groups. And then I think in the early 1900s is when you see the major increase in acts that are passed by the United States Congress and signed by presidents that are really about getting rid of any enemies that they saw to the state, right? And really they're looking at folks who are members of communist parties or anarchists, right? And these are people that are really seen as major threats to the United States, right? And so you have the Espionage Act of 1917, which occurs right around the time the United States is getting involved in World War One, around the time of the Russian Revolution, right, and the Bolsheviks coming to power, and these things, spark a lot of fear in the United States government, and they decide to sort of pass an act that says if anybody is going to give aid to any quote enemies of the United States, then they can go, either be arrested, and jailed and deported, right? And then the following year in 1918, you have the Sedition Act, right? And this is, even if you speak out, right, it's not about even giving aid, as 1970 said, you're going to give aid and you're going to support the enemies, and that enemies at the time could be Germany and other places, but a lot of them were internal enemies, and they're like Communist Party and people that were from Eastern Europe specifically, right? But the Sedition Act was like, if you speak out against the United States government, you could be jailed. And that happened where a lot of people who were calling for, in the United States, a lot of the radical labor unions and different communists and anarchist folks were saying, don't engage, like U.S. people workers should not engage in this war, right? Should not support the war. And so that act was set up, and several people went to jail for that, thousands of people. And then in the same year, they passed an immigrant act, the Immigration Act, which actually said that any immigrant in the United States who was a member of an anarchist organization could be deported, right? And so this is sort of around the time where a lot of labor unions were organizing, and I'm really interested in sort of the IWW because they're sort of the prototype of like revolutionary labor union, right? They believed in organizing by industry rather than by trade, and at that time you had a lot of unions were organized by trade and the AFL, and those AFL were very exclusive, right? They're exclusive based on your job, but also based on your race, right? People of color, women were not allowed to be in the AFL, but the Wobblies, right? The IWW actually included people of color and women, right? One of the founders was a Black and Mexican woman named Lucy Parsons. Hopefully you've heard of her. She's somebody who was one of the founders of IWW in 1905. But you also have people like Ben Fletcher, who was a Black longshoreman in Philadelphia, and he helped found Local 8, which was one of the largest and long-lasting integrated, predominantly Black, but they had other people in the union as well. That were part of IWW. But then you have in the West Coast, right, or at least in the Western United States, you had Rociando Dorme, right? He was a founder of the IWW in Phoenix, right? And so you have Mexican workers who were also organizing in IWW, and that was a major part of their movement, right? It was just organizing immigrant workers, organizing Black workers, organizing, folks around radical ideas, right? Building power in the workplace, challenging capitalism, and really building a mass militant unionism. And one of the big things was a call for the abolishment of the wage system, right? The wages they saw as a form of slavery. And I know there's a lot of debate about that, but, they were arguing against capitalism, right? Overthrowing capitalism. And so because of that, they were seen as a major threat to the United States government. And so in 1917, there was a large coordinated raid of IWW headquarters across the whole country, right? It was preceded the Palmer raids, which happened in 1919, right? The Palmer raids was another time where they went after anarchists and communist movements that were going on at that time. But IWW was the first test case of this, and they went in and they seized documents. They arrested hundreds of leaders of IWW, and they saw them as like the major threat. They were the internal threat that was going to overthrow the United States government. And while they agreed with, I think they were definitely part of their vision was to sort of change the whole system. this idea of like going after people for their ideas, right? Going after people for what they espoused was a real big sort of threat to people's freedom of speech, right? Freedom of assembly and organization. So then you have, like I said, in 1919 and 1920, you have the Palmer raids, where Attorney General Mitchell Palmer, right, coordinated actually with J. Edgar Hoover, right, young J. Edgar Hoover, who was only in his early 20s at the time, and they were sort of seeing this. They deemed it as a Red Scare because they believed that there was, there was all these communists that were growing in support, that were getting support from Russia, who had their Bolshevik Revolution. But there also was a group of anarchists who had organized bombings, right, or potential bombings. They sent bombs through the mail, and this was the thing that sparked a lot of fear in the minds of U.S. authorities, and so they decided to go after these groups using the Sedition Act, using the Espionage Act, and the Anti-Immigration Act. And that was really what they focused on, right? Going after these groups that they thought were going to destroy the United States, and just round up anybody who's even associated them in any way or not, right? Even if they had nothing to do with anything illegal, them being members was a form of being illegal, right? They were illegal just because they were members of these movements, right? And so, a lot of history is sort of built on, a lot of U.S. history is built on this. And one of the main things is they also sort of identified enemy groups were people who organized in support of, Black and white solidarity, right? Working class solidarity. That was a lot of times who they focused their attention on, because they saw that as, if you're supporting in the early 1900s, if you're supporting Black, freedom and sort of independence and things of that sort, then you must be a communist and you must be wanting to overthrow American ideals. And so we got to throw you in jail. Right. And so, this continued to go on. And we have the Smith Act, which actually happened the year before Pearl Harbor. Right. The Smith Act was another example of the United States government going after, Communist Party members. And actually, one thing that I think that a lot of times we don't even recognize is that even in 2025 in California, the California Constitution, it talks about anti-discrimination. And the one thing that you can't, they can still discriminate against you if you're a member of the Communist Party, right, or an avowed communist, right? So even in 2025, these ideas are still on the books. And so I think it's really important to see that the seeds of what Trump is doing now are not, it's not a new thing that Trump just sort of magically created. He's building upon a history of, seeing immigrant folks, seeing people of color as enemies. And so they're trying to figure out ways of clamping down on that, right? And there's all these other examples, and I know that Lita's going to talk, Professor Ramos is going to talk about this as well, but I think it's really important to see that history and recognize the continuities between it. And there's moments when people have been able to fight back and at least get those acts and laws to sort of be put back and at bay somewhat, but they're still there. And, Trump is just rewriting that in 2025. And so we have to be conscious of the sort of the foundation of American society is based upon exclusion, and especially against radical folks and people who question sort of American capitalism and those sort of things. So I'm going to step back for a minute and give some space to Lita if she wants to come in and talk.
Yes, please, Dr. Ramos, go ahead.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Radcliffe. We have a long legacy of solidarity and intersectional histories. I want to talk about two things, or a few things, but I want to organize my thoughts. Because on one hand, this is a film. This is a work of art. This is has a very clear ideological function. But so I want to talk about form and function. That's kind of the way I learned to analyze film. And I teach Chicanx and Central American film. And so I'm an artist. I also use archival images. So all of these things kind of intersect in my brain. The first part I want to talk about is the function of your film, historical memory and unforgetting. And so when I saw your film, which was so deep and profound, I first start thinking about the eugenics movement. I start thinking about in 1907, how in the U.S., the eugenics movement then becomes a global movement. But it starts here. It actually starts here in California. And we actually have the highest number of people we euthanize, you kill and exterminate, right? We start with our own history of extermination with Native Americans. But it continues into the 19th century, where immigrants are really deemed as criminal, deviant, and it's all about this social control of the immigrant, this fear mongering that happens as the U.S. is starting to see immigrants coming from so many parts of the world and into the U.S. And we're saying immigrants of color, right? There was no fear of white immigrants. It was mostly a fear of Italians and Arabs and Mexicans. So in the 1930s, here in California, we have Mexican repatriation. We actually just round up U.S. citizens, Mexicans, take them to Union Station and repatriate, right? The word, it's also interesting to see how language is used. I would say deportation, but the U.S. government is going to say repatriation, right? In the 1950s and 60s, 1950s, anti-communist Luisa Moreno, Guatemalan labor organizer, is deported. She is deemed a communist, right? And so she's organizing Black and Latinx laborers, mostly women, to start, organizing and unifying, right? But that work is seen as deviant and criminal by the United States. In the 1950s, late 50s, the Cuban Revolution is so powerful internationally, and I found it fascinating that Farouk, as a 15-year-old, was given the opportunity to study in Cuba. And I want to take a deep dive into that area with you because I find it amazing that here was a young person whose family has been expelled from Palestine, ends up in Lebanon, is already getting radicalized with the PLO, and then ends up in Cuba and is and that part. But the Third World Liberation Movement was absolutely powerful. I mean, San Francisco State first ethnic studies department. We at Cal State LA are the second ethnic studies in the nation. But we have also the movements and the disappearances and the torture knowledge that we have that was part of Chile, Argentina, Brazil. There's a great film now, Walter Salles, whose film I'm Still Here is about that disappearance of so many people, in particular, a lot of indigenous people who are disappeared in all these spaces where there are dictatorships. I myself have been working on a community archive for Central American history in LA, and a few of those people in the archive have been tortured, have been incarcerated, both in Guatemala and El Salvador, and are here living in LA. So this whole status, this whole idea of refugee, of displacement, of recreating your life in other spaces is absolutely so relevant to many of our communities in the United States. In the 1980s, Central Americans become known in the United States, right? We now have U.S. out of El Salvador. We're much more conscious under Reagan of U.S. imperialism than ever before. And we get to see a very large and inclusive solidarity movement. And so there were actual plans to detain Central Americans in the 1980s, I think similar to what Rabab mentioned with the seven Arab countries. It never came to fruition, but that decade of the 80s to the 90s became a dynamic but very controversial time with immigration rights. But it also then led to an incredible base of immigration rights activists and people studying immigration law. I mean, this is, I think, we still have incredible legacy of immigration rights advocacy in this country. Then we get to I'm jumping to today, and we are back to spaces as Anthony's mentioned, as all of us have mentioned, and you mentioned in the film, we go back to those moments where we are reminded that this is a repetition of history in different forms. I myself, growing up in LA, was very conscious of being an outsider, being a Salvadoran, living in LA, where there, I was born in the 60s, so my history doesn't really emerge until there's more public knowledge of Central America in the 1980s. And so now I want to switch to thinking about your film and the film as form. Your film is a documentary film, right, of what we call nonfiction. And I really say nonfiction because I think right now our young students really are challenged with even understanding or what is real. What is fiction? What is nonfiction? I mean, and the blurring of that. So I want to just share that the way you interweave your personal story, the images of your grandmother, and when she says, almost is it important to share this? And she kind of hesitates. And I just remember when the Japanese American National Museum opened in LA in 1985, that part of the beginning of that museum was archiving Japanese American history. And how challenging that was, because there were the younger generation, the Nisai, were very much wanting to know their history, but the older generation felt very uncomfortable with spending time thinking about things that were painful. And so it was a really interesting intergenerational conversation, which I think you include in the film very well. I also think it's so fascinating that your father was a photographer in the camps. And those images, I've only seen mostly Dorothea Lange's images of the camps. And you can see those images because she was a famous white entitled photographer who got to get paid. I mean, she was a great photographer, but she got to get paid to go into the camps and to go into the Bracero camps. And she was in spaces that the everyday person was not in. But then they ended up like in, Life magazine. So the idea of the archive and how you spent time looking for historical images and personal archives, including your own family archive, including the archive of Farouk and his family, and pictures of him when he was a young person. So I guess I'd like to end thinking and asking you to share how that was, looking and searching for those archival images and what their value is within your editing and composing of this film, and also the challenges, I think, things that you may not have been able to find in a representative document or an image.
Yes. I'm not muted. Okay, good. Yeah, the archival images. Well, yeah, you see there's a couple of shots of me in a basement. I'm turning the light on, and that's my grandfather's habitat. And he died, some years, quite a while before I had made the film and gone there. But he represented a story I really wanted to know more about, and I explored more later in my films after that. But the person who was transnational, or someone who had a foot in more than one place, really, because he had been educated in Japan and then come back to the United States, which was a practice in that community. And the people who were sent over were called kibe, which means returned to America. And but the thing that was fortunate was that he loved photography, so he took pictures, and he enrolled in the army. He was there for some time, like up until shortly before Pearl Harbor happened, actually. And he would go out and take all these pictures, and it was kind of funny because the government was so freaked out about people taking pictures of or going near military installations and stuff. And here was this kibe, they were under particular suspicion by the government generally. who had all these pictures of of troops and equipment and all the, these maneuvers and stuff. But anyway, and I wish I'd had the chance to talk to him, because he had died so long before I had the questions that would be worth asking him. But yeah, so he had all these pictures, and so I just went, I had a chance to really dive into those and scan them and think about them, and many of them didn't have much more information on, but yeah, I don't know what that is for me. It's a little bit frustrating, because I always have questions when I'm confronted with pictures that I have no answers to. So it's a kind of painful process for me to go through archives like that, including with my own family, because I see all these interesting things, but I don't know who all the people are, and or always where things are, and it's just like this, just sparking an inquiry, and then you just have to, if you're using them in a film, you find a way, a relationship to them, or you choose certain ones that work for this or that. But to me, it's always like feels like a very limited process. Like there's always these kind of, if you're thinking journalistically, or if you're trying to think figuratively or poetically, and I think I had a chance to get more poetic with pictures that I found to tell Farouk's story, because I just had a lot of him talking, and I had to work with his speech a lot, because he was not an easy person for many English speakers to understand, and if you just let him talk, because he wouldn't, his syntax and just the way his, the topics he would go to would be kind of hard to follow. I spent a lot of time kind of wrestling with his words and putting them in a way that I felt like I could make his story come across. And I was really trying to find something poetic in it, even though the other challenge with images, if you're telling a story about someone's intention, all you have is that sitting in this whatever cruddy room that they put you in, which is not great to look at, and you have to edit. And then you have a man who's talking about these things which are off camera. I think part of the film was about what the government allows you to see and what not to see, because I have a scene where I get stopped outside 26 Federal Plaza, which is kind of like the Death Star of New York, where all the agencies, like the former INS, now Homeland Security, are there, FBI, and where people would, immigrants go to report, and where they had special registration. They had thousands and tens of thousands of people have to show up there and report and get abused because they're from Muslim countries. Anyway, so when I lift up a camera to just look at this place, within 20 seconds, these agents come up to me and just start ordering me. First of all, they don't tell me they're agents. They just start ordering me to stop shooting, and I just keep shooting because who are you guys? And then eventually they identify themselves, and But so that's part of what I was saying with my grandfather's images, because and there's a great picture of him with his camera like that. So I definitely wanted to juxtapose those things, because one of the first things they did, or that under the Alien Enemies Act, the president had the authority to issue these proclamations. So even though the idea of the camps were planned in advance, the whole process wasn't so clear to everyone at the beginning. Because they didn't know exactly which populations they were going to incarcerate, or how they were going to go about it. They talked about just incarcerating Kibe, and etc. So, but they had these proclamations before they had the real clear mass incarceration. You had to turn in your radios and your cameras. So that was the first thing they did, was to take away anyone's means of documenting what was happening, even though many people, they took cameras in and they would take pictures, but mostly these pictures are family pictures. Like they're just like pretty innocuous looking, of them just, in front of their barrack or something, just posing like a family photo. That's the majority of what the pictures are from there, because they weren't thinking like I would think and trying to document something. And then in my next film, I did use a few pictures which were smuggled out or taken of things, but those are vanishingly small. A number of pictures that actually show, any of the, the abuse or just contradictions or oppression that was going on. So yeah, when you're making a documentary, images, what you're trying to use images that are truthful. Um, and I try harder than most people, I think, to show pictures that correlate with a place. You see an internment documentary, internment, it's not actually the correct word, but you see a picture, a movie about those times, and then you don't always know what camp you are, but like if someone, if you're in the family or in the community, like, you're not going to get away with showing like Manzanar when you mean Tule Lake, or a different one of the 10 camps. So then that ups the challenges because the camps are not so dramatic looking to begin with, But Farouk, just getting back to Farouk, I needed something visual to latch onto because there was like nothing, there's a few pictures, but so I seized on a few things he said and also my own home, and I came up with a tree motif, which is, I had a flowering cherry blossom tree, which is kind of connected with Japan, just in front of the building where I had me living. So I used that, and then and when I read about Palestine and things that were going on, one of the things that would happen is they would just tear down all these olive trees, and they're constantly doing that. Basically, these trees which have been there. So the tree is an organism that is meant to stay in one place, right? It has roots. It stays. It's planted. It grows. It takes many years to grow. So that to me gave me a thread to make this more than just really cut and dried like prison, like to go into some of what Farouk was saying and to kind of give it some expression, and then when his favorite surah is the story of the cave, that was like, oh great, finally, I have something that I can, that's evocative, that just gives you something that a way to poetically experience what he's experiencing, because you really need that. Even if you're telling a documentary about facts and just terrible things, you need some way to transcend that, and to give yourself a human experience that is not just just being downtrodden, just a vision, So Farouk was someone who just had a real vision, and I just tried to take the pieces of it and use images I found. I found pictures, even when I went on my honeymoon, and even though I've never been to Palestine, like we were in around the Mediterranean in Ibiza, and then we had some olive trees and various trees which I thought were good enough. I just wanted some pictures of trees, which kind of resembled trees which you would find around his home, because there weren't enough pictures or footage that I could find of the trees. So that's what I kind of embroider some of those stories with as well. Like pictures I found online of a particular tree. Yes, this was definitely, in that area, and others that I kind of snuck in to help flesh it out.
Thank you. I was actually going to say other things, but then some of the discussion that happened here triggered some of the thoughts in my mind. Uh, Probably some random thoughts on when you were talking about memory and so on. I kept remembering Reverend Michael Yoshi, because Michael Yoshi, that's how we met. We met through Michael Yoshi of Buena Vista United Methodist Church in Bay Area, and he's retired now. But Michael always says why it's really important to tell the stories, but to tell the stories in order to write them up, in order to get people to he thinks that this is one of the ways to get communities together, in order to tell the story, in order to wake up consciousness and be able. It's one of the first steps in order to start retrieving the right, to get back the rights, okay, to restore the rights and justice and so on. And but he also like was talking also about how hard it is to do so, the way you're talking about it. And I do remember like even asking on various trips to Palestine, talking to freed prisoners, can you tell, and you're talking about prison advocates, would people tell their narratives? And advocates of prisoners, even the toughest prisoners, say that it's very hard to tell stories of torture, because it's so rough. I mean, when prisoners sit down and tells you what's going on, it must have taken so much out of them to be able to share. Not only because it's like the pain itself it invokes and so on, but it's also part of the humiliation that they've gone through. I mean, this whole thing that you actually don't have any control over your surrounding except your mind, that you have to control in order for you to dissociate your body from what's being done to you in order to stay resilient. I mean, it's very, very difficult. But also what things get triggered. I mean, you're talking about the trees, and every single time we used to have trees. I always like bug my brothers in Palestine. When is the new olive oil coming in? When, and especially the olive oil that burns, because when it comes out, right at the beginning, the fresh pressed cold olive oil, there is a burning thing. And I remember it since we were little, because it comes in and they say the new oil. Nobody says the new olive oil or something. The new oil, and you eat it like by itself or with lebanon or something like this. And we used to gather, and then my dad will peel the oranges and puts the orange peel on top of the little coal uh, thing, which is like a little oven in the middle of the room, and it starts smelling, and it has this particular thing. And to me, it's kind of like when I see the trees, it reminds me, it invokes all these memories. And yesterday, I heard that the cemetery in Nablus, there was a battle there. This was attacked, and all I could think of, what's happening to the graves? What's happening to the graves of my mother, of my father, of my brother? That the first time I go, and I've been displaced for a very long time, 12 years. I couldn't go back. And it's not like the people who have been displaced in Gaza, the horrible things that are happening everywhere. So I push myself to I feel embarrassed and I feel guilty for feeling bad about thinking about the graves of my own individual graves in a little cemetery, when there are people who have no graves, whose bodies are lost. But I keep thinking, like, I want to even ask my brother, go check on the graves. Are they still standing? It's what's going on. But I'm keep thinking about, because that's where I go and I connect with my ancestors. I just stand there, and just something happens to me, because they all died when I wasn't there. I mean, I missed their death. I missed the rich. I'm only my father. I only caught. Uh, I arrived when he was already in the bed that he was dying in ICU. I couldn't talk to him or something. But it has to do with the occupation. So it's to think about that is very, very difficult. So that's kind of like what do you think about things, and how do you talk about them, and whose memories you talk about. But then when you talk about the old archives and so on, Palestinian archives, they're destroyed. Every time people collect archives, they get destroyed. So to me, that's a very, very main issue to think about. That's one. I mean, we can talk about it more and more, and I think it's also for the classes. It's how do you even study archives, and how do you teach archives, and how do you study and honor the archives of a people which are being destroyed and erased in order to accomplish the genocide, and how do you honor them and not tend to get into the academic sort of impulse or any archival production and so on, that tends to be like sort of kind of like opportunistic and so on, which I feel that you honored that so much, Conrad, when you were doing your work. And I really appreciate that, with care and respect and gentleness, to think about how do you do that and how do you bring that out, because it's really important. I agree with Michael that you need to, and especially because our knowledge, our indigenous knowledge, is not respected, it's not believed, it's not validated, even though we know it. And even when we produce knowledge, it's still questioned. So that's a big issue. The second question, which is connected to the first one, has to do with the desaparecidos that you spoke about, Lida. And when I was watching the return of the bodies of the Israeli hostages, and especially this woman, Bibas, Shiri Bibas, who was a military person. and it was a mix-up with her body, that Hamas did not actually have the body, and it was a body of a Palestinian woman. It was a huge thing. Then they returned the body, and I kept thinking about the body of this Palestinian woman that I've been researching forever. It's been over 40 years. Her name is Dalal Mughrabi. She was killed in 1978. She was a commander, and she was killed in 1978. She was the commander of a unit. She went on the beach in Jaffa, and her mission again was to release Palestinian prisoners. She was killed. Israel captured her body in 1978. In 2008, there was exchange of prisoners. Her body was supposed to be returned in a coffin in an exchange between Israel and Hezbollah of Lebanon. Except when they conducted DNA, it turns out it wasn't her body. Exactly the same way that there was a DNA test on this Israeli Shiri Bibas. Now, they told the Israelis, until now, this is 2008, until now, Israel has not returned her body. Right then, in 2008, they dug a grave for her before she came. She's from Shatila. I mean, she's for me because I research Palestinian women, feminism, and so on, and because I look at the feminist women commanders. And she's from Shatila. I've been like since 1978. I remember the day at the time I heard about her being killed, and they dug a grave for her, and they never retrieved her body, and so they buried her mother, who died a couple of months. So until now, her body was never returned. Shiri Bibas, the Israeli woman, her body was within 24 hours. Within 24 hours. And I keep thinking, where is Dalal Mughrabi? Why Dalal Mughrabi is not returned? Where is her body? Where is her bones? And we know that Israel keeps the bodies of Palestinian, especially fighters, martyrs, in number cemetery. And Israel knows where they are. Why didn't they return them? Why can these bodies, and now there is so many thousands and thousands and thousands of bodies that are not buried. And I know Konrad and Lida and Anthony. You know how important it is to bury the dead. In general, in all cultures. Not people say it's only in Islam. It's not. It's very important to put people to rest, for them to say, for their soul and for their families to be able to have peace. And in Arabic, we say the way to honor a dead is to bury them. And so there is additional torture. And now Israeli Knesset has already approved in the first reading a law not to give back the bodies of Palestinian martyrs. I mean, they have a law. They have a law that a Palestinian prisoner died, Walid Dakka, last year, died in prison out of cancer, got sick, and they refused to give. The family requested from the Israeli Supreme Court, and they refused to hand over the body so he would be buried. He died in prison. And now they have a law, no bodies of martyrs will be given back to the Palestinians. So they will be tortured, the families, all their lives. Not to mention the bodies of the people that we do not know. They dump them on top of each other, while Palestinians, they actually put the Israeli bodies where they can be found, and they are found right away and given back. So, I mean, that's one thing. But where are the bodies? Where are the bones? And this goes into my research is about what the bones as archival matter. These are archival matter, and it goes into indigenous communities, into the disappeared, that it's also a testament to history of what happened in history, because this might be the only evidence you have in the absence of any archival material, and in the comparative research with other communities. The other thing I wanted to say, when you talked about El Salvador, yes, they did try. Actually, there is a very clear connection between what happened in El Salvador and what happened to LA8, because Reagan tried to corner the Committee in Solidarity with the People of El Salvador, which was the biggest solidarity movement in Central America at the time. They tried to crush them. They called them for Congress hearings, and they couldn't crush them. So they moved to LA, to Palestine, because they thought this was the weakest link. and they thought if they crush the Palestinians, then they can move against. It's all documented. I mean, we didn't know about the Iran Contra affair and all of the stuff they were doing, and they failed because when the Palestinians got arrested, the Japanese community went to support them, the Mexican community went to support them, activist blacks went to support them, everybody in the movement went to support them, and the Palestinian community went to support them. It didn't work to instill a chilling effect. So there is another part of the story aside from the repression that they tried to instill, that there is a part of say no, we're not going to do it. So a big part of the LA8 actually is the solidarity and resistance and resilience, just like Farouk that was arrested and said, I'm not going to shut up. I'm going to call and say, it's me and it's these other detainees and this is what's going on, to break the story, to make it possible to have this material, to tell the story. The other thing about Farouk, and I actually forgot, thank you, Konrad, for reminding me, that was visa extension, which was, by the way, about the LAA too. They got them onto visa violations, like they overstayed their visas as students, or they were residents, but they weren't citizens yet. And there was a law passed afterward, not a law, Supreme Court case that we lost, that said that citizens and residents don't have the same rights. So the LA8, we lost this case that the ADC sued the government that the residents don't have the same law rights as citizens. You don't have the right of free speech and so on as citizens. But we also have cases like Rasmiya Ode, for example. The reason she was deported was because she lied on her. They accused her of lying on her papers to request residency because her father was an American citizen. However, Ayan Hirzi Ali, the Somali U.S. Collaborator, got her citizenship, even though she also lied on her visa. And there is an article by the scholar Rupal Oza, who teaches at Hunter College. She wrote about it. She compares the case of Rasmiya and the case of Ayan Hirzi Ali, and how Ayan Hirzi Ali was able to get the citizenship, but Rasmiya was denied it for the same offense. So when they even say that you overstayed your visa and so on, it works in the case of some, and it doesn't work in the case of other. And the last thing I want to say, because it leads me to the next action that we already talked about, is the whole question of labor that you spoke about, Anthony, in the terms of the U.S. and that connects to the Palestinian history of communist and labor movement. That one of the reasons that we don't hear a lot about the Palestinian labor movement and Palestinian communist history is because there were a split in the Palestinian communist movement, specifically over the whole question of Zionist, kind of like Zionist commitments, like here, white supremacy, to the point that the Communist Party actually agreed with the concentration camp of the Japanese. Took a very long time for them to, and there was a huge rift within the communist movement over racism, over several things. I mean, still some quarters of the U.S. communist movement still suffers from that. But this was also in the big split in the Palestinian communist movement, the labor movement, over Zionism, because some of the movements some of the Jewish members became Zionists and so on, and insisted on that. And they said any discussion of Palestinian nationalism is anti-socialism and against labor and so on, and basically stop being discussed anywhere in socialist country, which is something that we might actually be willing to discuss in the future. Which leads me to the next thing, that there are workers today from different unions at the U.C. system that are on strike. They are on strike for their life wage. They are on strike for their rights, for support of Palestine, and they have a statement that they are putting out in support of Palestine, and they're asking for our solidarity. So they are meeting right now, and I'm not sure if they are ready to receive our solidarity, but we can continue discussing as I connect with them and see what they would like us to do, if we want to give them a shout out and move to the next point of discussion. Yeah. Do you want to go into? I don't know, Farouk, Lida, you're asking questions of Farouk. Do you want to ask them on in the open classroom? And for Konrad, you can or you can respond to anything here, or
I can do that.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I thought when you were mentioning the metaphor of the tree, the cherry blossom tree and the olive tree, and the uprootedness of Farouk, but I'm also wanting to think about your film as healing, because that historical memory and all of that healing, maybe for you and your personal journey. I don't know if I'm just using the word healing, but let's just imagine all the positive things and affirmation that this process has allowed you on a personal level, but also for the son. I'm just thinking about this young man who's seeing his father get taken away. He says, "This is the only family I have." And then he's also in the film, and at one point is also, nearly imprisoned, right? Because they go into his house and they try to confiscate his things and accuse him of being, a terrorist too. But I think, I guess my thought is, if you could share how you, in your, in the work, in the process, where you see that the film has some intersecting space to create a route, maybe not lots of routes, but a route for the son, for his future, right? Because this, his father comes out and there's a victory there after all that hardship, but then he tragically passes quickly. But there is a victory there that he's released, and there's something there for his son. I'm just thinking the next generation and imagining him. I often do this with my students where I'll ask them to imagine the next chapter, the next part of that person's, where they're going to go. And I don't know if you can kind of think of I think most of our students are around the age of his son in that film.
Yes. Well, I mean, I've stayed in touch with Tarek, and he moved out of New York area, so I don't see him that often. But I do talk to him. But I think, yeah, I gave the idea of the grave as not being, where I said that the grave doesn't contain Farouk, right? So I guess in a way it's making a myth, not in the sense of something that's not true, but something that that reaches beyond the physical world. I think and I hope that's what some young people can take from it. But I guess I would have to ask young people themselves, what they think, what they get out of it. It's even though I have a son who's turning 14 in March, and a daughter who's 8, and they aren't particularly engaged with things that I've been devoted to, and that's totally fine. I think I would love it if people take this story of struggle, and they can see in a way that the victory that was won through just this grueling legal political battle for Farouk, and that people are inspired to engage these kind of tools again, or to keep on, to I mean, I think when a group of people are devoted to the fate of a person, I think there's something that the people are really ennobled by it, and there's a piece, there's something that stays with them from that fight. We had people standing in front of 26 Federal Plaza, for months and a couple of years speaking about Farouk, and he was someone who allowed us to transcend themselves, really. Because before I got involved with the story, I wasn't, it became like my own journey. It was really a journey for me, I guess, to be involved with this battle. The committee, like David and Jane, and then later Shane Kadidal from Center for Constitutional Rights, just fought it out to the end, really. And so I guess I hope that it builds some kind of persistence or a sense of duration in young people who might be concerned about particular things that are happening. But I think it became about a person, like trying to rally around a particular person who had been oppressed, and became someone who could speak for himself, but also became someone who we could believe in.
Yeah, thank you. The persistence, and I know when my students watch documentaries and there's conversation and dialogue, like what we're doing now, it's so rich. They're able to put little roots, little connective networks in their brain and see their past and see, and so I'm grateful to have seen the film. I learned so many things. I had no idea of the plenary power doctrine. Like, I know a few doctrines, doctrine of discovery, but that one is like, I don't know if anybody wants to talk about that or if it's too late, but there we go.
Yeah, there were so many principles that came.
Go ahead, yeah.
There were so many things I learned, which I've almost forgotten since then, I guess, because it seems like, even these kind of oppressive pillars, like plenary power doctrine and Patriot Act and 1996 laws, it's almost as if like the ground is always shifting, to where you kind of wish that Congress had power to do things like, or that, the power to oppress was, could be addressed through democratic processes, rather than whatever the hell we're living through right now, but again, I hope people still are interested in history. Like this is like 20 years ago, but it's historical. Like there's so many pieces of it that are just a lot of things have changed and shifted today. But I think, when you have a principle like plenary power doctrine, I think it's important to understand those things. And I just hope that people can engage with a concept like that, because I'm worried, and as a middle-aged person whose son is, very much engaged with TikTok, like, who has the patience to follow through a concept like that and just keep a principle in your mind and have it occupy space in your thinking, and to be able to engage with it, and to hang on to principles. Because I think what I see now is just a lot of upending of good and bad principles, like even the stuff that was very worrisome about what you would call the right from back then, or the Republicans, or whatever you might see yourself up against. Even their totems, their ideals have been shattered. So it's like I don't know. I would really like to see the threads of discussion that are taking place among people, like in your class now. It must be great to see what people are engaging with, and hope it gives some hope for the future.
Yeah, one thing that I was really inspired by, sort of just kind of watching the how the solidarity sort of support, right? And that's a major part of a lot of folks who've been incarcerated. You know, I remember going back to the before 9/11. I remember there was a Mumia 911, right, where everybody sort of organized to try to get Mumia Abdul-Jamal off death row, and that kind of movement that's built to support folks who are incarcerated or who are, you know, detained, like Farouk. And so to kind of see how, and you talked about how that was a moment that really gave you, you know, inspired you, right, to be a part of this movement. What do you think, like, after it's all said and done, did you see that movement kind of like go in anywhere else? Like, do you think part of the folks who were involved, did they get involved in other things, right? Like, and, you know, because 9/11 happened, and then there's this sort of long delay, right, where the society is still kind of trying to figure out how to adjust from that. And I remember there was at the initial moment, there was a lot of the radicals that were sort of very outspoken kind of were silent for a while. And so then I think some of these movements that you're involved in, or that you help with Farouk and other folks, help to sort of open space up for people to be a little more vocal and organized. And so did you see that kind of movement continue on after he was released, or how did that kind of play out? Because I'm always interested in, while we understand the strength and the power and the sort of authoritarianism of the U.S. nation state, to me, it's always that solidarity, whether it's the small, you know, around one figure who's also representative of a large group of people that are all being caught up in this sort of sweeping net that the U.S. government was going after so-called terrorists right after 9/11. But then how that sort of builds into larger movements and sort of connects to other types of struggles that are going on. And so did you have any sort of idea, like, what went on with that and sort of where things are at now? You know, yeah, I'm interested in sort of what you see the post after he's released, what happens next.
Well, I have to admit, you know, I feel less engaged than I was back then. You know, I have what I told you, Professor Rabab, one time. I have a lot of bourgeois concerns right now, you know, with the family and all that. And I'm not involved in academics, you know, which gives you, I guess, a chance to engage in knowledge production and you know, and really broaden your knowledge. You know, I've become a production professional. I have projects which I feel I still am keeping up my work, you know, that I feel engages things stories that I think should be told. But you know, the last time I guess last project where I was maybe in this mode of being something like an activist filmmaker, I guess, which is, I think it is an activist filmmaker film in a way that I made. I mean, I like to think it's a good film, but it's not, you know, it's not pretending to have distance, and it's definitely advocating, you know. But you know, there's a group called Nakasek, which was founded by Korean American immigrants, and you know, includes actually, you know, immigrants from everywhere. And they, I shout out, in 2018, I went on the road with them. They were doing a bicycle tour of going from the northern border on the West Coast to the southern border, and just basically riding there, you know, riding all the way through and then having events along the way, you know. And so that was a really hopeful, you know, but for me, it was grueling. I was there for 3 days. I followed them for 3 days, and that was plenty for my capacity, you know. And they're still doing work, and they've opened up offices in Texas, Virginia, and you know, they're in Chicago, and they I think you know, they would be good people to tune in with, I guess, about immigrant rights movements coming from immigrants, because you know, these are people who, many of them are would be eligible for the DREAM Act or have been covered by DACA. People, you know, who are out of status, who are putting themselves out there, you know, and just kind of relying on the safety of you know, of being of solidarity, really. I mean, so I guess that's where I would look for inspiration if I was going to be active again, or be more putting myself out there you know, as an activist, you know, um, yeah. But I can't say that I know what people. Well, I mean, I know Jane Guskin from the film has been very active in Palestinian solidarity, and uh, David Wilson is always up to something. I mean, they definitely have persisted. And then of course, two of the people who you saw are gone. Shireen Chirazo, Bernie McFall. They were active and very committed activists. I saw Shireen for some years after that. She was involved in different things. When it was some while before I interviewed her. Just did that interview you see in the film. So she was doing various things, and then she got cancer, and I saw her up to just a few months before she passed, and she was, and then the last thing she did, Professor, was give me a box full of tapes of your speeches. So she entrusted me with those, which I can't say that I've, they should be digitized or something, but it takes resources and time to do that. But if I still have them. I don't know what state they're in right now, but that shows the connection, and how just how she maintained that. She carried that torch of solidarity up to her final breath, I'm sure. So
I think Farouk was known in the community. I knew him. He was actually working during the day as a taxi driver and organizing during the night. So like he would go to all the demonstrations. He wasn't just like a leader, but he was organizing all the time. So that's how many of us knew him, and many of the people who were, you're absolutely right. I saw them around in the movement, and they're still around. Like some people are organizing and so on. But there is also what you're talking about from the Nikki young people who are the Japanese organizing. There is also the many young Koreans, Zanyeki. Today we were going to show this new video we just had yesterday. Young Japanese who are outside the Israeli embassy in Tokyo trying to get in and fighting with the police and actually chanting in Arabic. And there is so much organizing. We had so many people in the I think it was sometime in the spring. Many groups came together from Japanese, Koreans, and many people to protest an award that was given by the Jewish Community Relations Council to one of the leaders of the anti-Asian hate coalition, because Jewish Community Relations Council has been trying to pretend that it's actually against the Zionist group, trying to basically wash the whole Zionist stuff because they're refusing to condemn what Israel is doing. And all these young people have been organizing every week protests and activities and so on, and speaking out. And they said, we're not going to be silent. We're going to get up. And they were in the Chinese parade. They were everywhere. And of course, we cannot like speak for folks who are organizing within the communities. We have to respect whatever the community is organizing. But when young people are organized, they did an amazing activism, and they spoke up, and they're still doing it. They're doing all of this stuff, and some of them are aware of what happened with the Farouk case. Some of them are aware of Anime Alien. Definitely the people who go to San Francisco State and the community, and Michael Yoshi and other people, because Buena Vista continues. There is many folks who are continuing to do this. They come together and organize. And I mean, I knew this, some of the solidarity, when I was in New York with the Asian Women's United, with many people who were organizing with the grandmothers of the so-called comfort women. All of this stuff has been historical. Young Koreans United were always part of the organizing. I mean, this goes back there with all our communities. They're just not on the radar of mainstream media for a reason. This is also why you talk about the history, why we're all talking about the history. It's not there. That's why the film becomes so important. And so I just want to interrupt for 1 minute to just say that we are here in solidarity with the workers from the U.S.C, and that are organizing right now. UPTI workers who are organizing, they are UPTI and AFSMI, U.C. workers who are on strike now at Palm and Mission Bay campuses. They are protesting, they are on strike, they are on a picket line. They are both demanding their rights from the UC, and they are also supporting Palestine. And we are here united in support of them. We already posted the statement, and we are going to post more. And this comes from all of us on the panel, and we will continue the discussion of what we wanted to say. And I also wanted to kind of like ask our colleagues of what given what's going on today, which is very much kind of inspired by the past, or let's say maybe inspired is not the right word, but and how what's going on, what's happening in terms of the organizing. I mean, we know what's happening in terms of the politics and so on, but what's happening on the ground in terms of organizing. And maybe I don't think I'm putting you on the spot, Conrad, but how can what else what we can do, because I've been bugging you to have your film being shown everywhere and using it as an inspiration to connect the past with the present, because I think the stories you're telling are really important, and I think the stories we're telling here are so important because it actually gets people to kind of learn about this, and you archived it. So this is but so what can we say? Maybe we can take maybe Anthony, Lida, and then Conrad. You can talk about that. Please go ahead. And also, one of our comrades, Nader, who's always attending, is talking about the remains of Patrice Lumumba. And there is so many remains that we still don't know where they are. So thank you so much, Nader. This is really amazing. We will add it to the archival work that we're doing, and we will definitely credit you. Thank you. And I thank you so much for always coming and you know, yeah, man, by the way, also I should just say this is from my other research. I keep forgetting. Last year, France gave 24 skulls of Algerian fighters that were displayed in the Le Musée de l'Homme in Paris to the Algerians. There is over 1,000 skulls. The whole question is that not only why they're holding them, why are they displaying them in a museum?
Right.
And when I do my, I just want to say one more thing. When I do my presentation and speak about this, and I make an argument that the only remains that were always buried honorably were Sarah Barton, whose remains were only buried because Nelson Mandela, after the end of political apartheid in South Africa, demanded from the French that her remains were given, and she was buried on a hill in Cape Town. And the moral of this is that when there is liberation, that's where our dead come home and get buried in dignity. And when our liberation movements achieve any kind of victories, it's temporary, it's not all there, but that's the only time when we can achieve that. But that's what happened with the Algerians as well. So there is so many. We will do that. We already have a plan for April to be able to discuss that. But let's go into the discussions from what's going on today, what's happening, so people don't get more demoralized and think that we are nothing is going on. So Professor Anthony and Professor Lida, and end with Conrad.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, as a historian, I'm always kind of thinking historically, and then kind of coming to now. Looking at and I'm coming from a perspective of labor history, right? Because that's really something I'm really interested in. The labor movement, as I said, it had moments of being very radical and revolutionary, but then, it experienced the full power of the U.S. government to kind of break that up, right? And so then the labor movement has really been sort of captured by a labor aristocracy, right? That really is in line with capitalism, right? And so, and most of those labor folks also were very 100% behind Israel, right? The founding of Israel, a lot of the labor unions supported Israel from the beginning, right? Before it actually was a nation. The American Federation of Labor actually supported the Balfour Declaration, and that's something that really shows that they saw that they believed that Palestine should be a Jewish state, right? You have millions of dollars in donations going to the National Labor Union in Israel, right? And after several of the wars that went on after the Nakba in 1956 and in 1967, each of those times you had U.S. labor movements, right, really supporting Israel. And so, I'm really inspired by the fact that when you have, movements that are countering that, right? You had, especially Black and Arab auto workers, right? That's a really big time where you had real solidarity across difference, right? Organizing in support of Palestine, right? That happened in '67. Then you had the Arab Labor Caucus that was formed in UAW, which really helped to sort of create a space for Arab workers to talk about Palestine and to bring that into context. And so that's always been an important space where labor has been a focal point, right, for Palestinian liberation. You have the Labor for Palestine being founded in 2004 after the Second Intifada, and that's another space where you see that upsurge. And so, even though there's a lot of ebbs and flows in that period, right, from then to now, I think we're now at another important upsurge in labor solidarity for Palestine. Right, it's not always the main like AFL-CIO, but it's smaller unions, but it's also caucuses and different groups in those unions that are really behind. First calling for a ceasefire, right? We know that was a big call, but now really calling for BDS and other types of, freedom in Palestine. And so I think that's something that really is inspiring me. The UAW again, especially the student workers, right? Were really some of the first ones to call for those things, and then other unions, right? My own union, our union, CFA, has been, slow to even respond, right? Slow to even say anything or to allow conversations around Palestine to really happen, right? We've seen instances where it's been really kind of pushed back, and so the good thing though is, as Dr. Abdulhadi has talked about, is that PAM, the Palestinian Arab Muslim Caucus, right, has formed in CFA and really moved the question of Palestine way closer to the center, right? At the assemblies the last 2 years, there's been conversations, there's been discussions, there've been resolutions passed in support of Palestine, which is a major shift, right? Because I remember, prior to the COVID, right, there was a assembly we had, and we couldn't even get a discussion about supporting Palestinian scholars, right, their ability to sort of move and to kind of leave, and because Israel was trying to stop their movement, we wanted to pass a resolution. They wouldn't even let that even come to a discussion in meetings, right? So things have really shifted, and I think it's good that organizations like PAM and other solidarity movements have really been pushing this forward in labor, because I feel like at the end of the day, labor to me, while I support all different social movements, and social movements, right, have different sort of things going on, I really feel like if labor could get its stuff together, this is where we have really we can control the means of production and those other type of things. So I think it's always important for labor to be centered in these kind of discussions of justice. And I know that there's debates where people want to debate like, oh, should labor take a side because there's going to be people in the union that might be mad. We should only talk about bread and butter issues. But if you don't talk about social justice, right, and the fact that our government, specifically in the United States, is funding genocide, right, is funding the oppression and colonization, continued colonization of Palestine. If you don't call that out and see that as a part of your duty, then you're going to be looked at negatively in history, right? And you're going to look back, and just like when we look back at the folks who did these things and we call them out and condemn them, that will be us for not saying anything or siding with on the wrong side of history, right? So I'm very inspired, and really, I think I want to say one more thing, and I'm gonna let Lee speak. A lot of that courage for faculty has come because students, right, in last spring started the encampments, right? Those encampments really created a sense of, opened the contradictions of our universities, right? Recognizing the fact that our universities are also bastions of sort of support for genocide, right? And all the discussion around divestments was very important, right? The students kind of pushed that forward. And so now that's allowed, I think, faculty to say, well, we support our students, and we also believe as a faculty union that we should be opposed to just wanton murder, right, genocide, and sort of the continued colonization of Palestine. And so I'm very inspired by that, and I see that that's a building movement, that even though there has been an attempt, and Trump is doing what he's trying to do to silence that stuff, I think that you're not going to threaten people into silence again, right? People are not going to be threatened and allow all the little negative stuff that's happening to sort of make them be quiet and just accept the way that the colonialism and genocide has been occurring to Palestinian people. So I'm inspired by that, and I know Lita has other examples, and so I'll move over and let her speak.
Whoa. Okay. So thank you. Anthony, two things I want to focus on. Our Faculty Labor Association, CFA, we're focused on the attack right now on ethnic studies. So talk about erasure, historical memory. If we can't teach, if I can't show your film in my class, then obviously that we're screwed, right? This is where we're going to protect, and we're advocating for the protection and the defense of the field of ethnic studies. And that is something that's happening from K through 12 and in higher ed. And that's a huge campaign. The other campaign is immigration. And we do have a lot of knowledge, because this isn't the first time Trump's been in office. So the Muslim ban, immigration, we've had decades now of immigration reform advocacy. So we will continue with Know Your Rights. That has already put a damper, right? Tom Homan said, people know their rights. That's not fair. We're not able to do our job. But I really want to focus on the ground, the smaller organizations that are doing mutual aid, brigades on the street. We have community self-defense coalitions that are many, many small groups of organizations that in solidarity become a front to fight immigration on the and again, when we're talking about deportations, we're talking about Blacks, Latinos, right? The Latinx communities. We're talking about indigenous communities. We're talking about Asian communities. We're talking about Palestine, Arab, Muslim communities. We're talking about many different people, right? At the same time right now. So I think the word in Spanish, solo el pueblo salva al pueblo, that we take care of ourselves, right? And so I think that this is where we are aware that we cannot rely on the state. The state is against us. We're in for the fight. But the solidarity and the learning and the examples of solidarity of the past, and films like yours, Konrad, are so important, because that visualization, that mentorship for our young people and mid and older, everybody, is so important. If we see it and we hear the voice of Farouk, and we hear your voice, and we see the voice of your grandmother, those are the things that really move us, right, as human beings. And so again, I just want to thank you for the long process I'm sure it was to make your film, and for sharing your film with us today.
Konrad?
Yes. Well, as I said, I'm really not. I can't call myself an activist these days. So I would just shout out Student for Solidarity, which is an organization of Japanese. Though I don't, it's, and I'm told that Nikkei Rising have been engaged with Palestine Solidarity. So that's as much as I can say about that. I mean, I'm working on another film which is looking at the lost record of Japanese language literature in the United States, which there was a literary movement that was taking place from the 20s to the 30s. And my story focuses on Little Tokyo, Los Angeles, and tells a story that was published in Tule Lake, the camp where they put the so-called disloyal Japanese who didn't give the right answers to the loyalty questionnaire. There was a literary magazine that was published in Tule Lake where there was so-called riots. There was the army came in and basically ran roughshod over the population and went ransacked people's homes or their barracks. But there was a literature that came out of this camp, and so my project is is having it translated and adapting it into dramatic form. But I'm putting this project as also a documentary that tells the story of the abduction of fathers in that period between after Pearl Harbor attack, but before everyone was completely removed from their homes from the West Coast. I'm talking about the Japanese Americans, and that's the story I'm telling right now. And it takes a lot of, it's just a pretty and it's also actually the funding for that is under threat because I got a grant from the Japanese American Confinement Sites grant program, which is a ripe target for the things that are happening now. So I'm trying to push through some paperwork very fast so I know where we stand, because there's a lot at stake. There's 5 years of my work really that is in the balance, I guess, depending on what whether we are whether we come in anyone's sights enough for any of this ad hoc sort of targeting of DEI and anything that you know that says anything bad about the United States or things. So that's what's going on with me right now. So it's a little preoccupying, but once I've gone through the next stage, I hope to be more around and to keep on engaging with people like you all, because it's very important to maintain these ties. And I'm really grateful that after 20 years, well, we we had a screening in July, this past July, which was the 20th anniversary of Farouk's death, and we invited some people, and not just with this film, but it's a really nice. I really like to reconnect, and it's really great to see that. For you, Professor Abdulhadi, I didn't even know you when this was actually happening, which is really interesting. It was really I sort of knew of you, and then Shireen spoke of you, and then I was able to meet you in California. So that's very interesting. So it's just really great, that you've made this happen, and honored my work this way. I hope I hope it's a vehicle for the things that you all are trying to do, and a way for you to contemplate certain things, and this story of this amazing person, Farouk. So I'm just really really glad to have had this talk, and I hope to do more things. Whatever can be useful in given the times.
Thank you so much, Conrad. You want to say you're not an activist, but we're sticking the label on you. We see you as an activist because activism can be in so many ways. There's not one way of it. We're very grateful and appreciative of you and your talent and your ability to create this work that will continue always to be there, just like the books that we read and just like the histories we make. So we're very appreciative. We are going to continue the campaign to support you, to make sure that the film that you're making about your father is really important. This is also another element of making sure that we, in our work, we are not demonizing the men in our community and engaging in some essentialist, poor way of gender work and gender and sexual justice, but we're actually working on justice for all. Thank you for making this possible. Thank you, Professor Lida Ramos and Professor Anthony Ratcliffe, for joining us. Thank you for Pam and for all the people who are working together to make this happen. Thank you for the people who are always struggling to make it possible for us to continue teaching, educating, struggling, and moving towards justice. And sometimes things might be gloom, but I want to remind us all that Trump did say that he wanted to displace all the Palestinians from Gaza and create the Riviera of the Middle East. I'm just going to ask a question. In the tradition of critical thinking, where is that plan now? So just because it's going to make things happen does not mean that things happen. Just because those in power say this is what I'd like doesn't mean that this is the way history is going to go. We have a big role to play. And when people move and when people say they want to change things, they can and do affect history. This happened in Vietnam. This happened in liberation. This happened throughout all our histories. And we're here to tell these stories. We need to tell these stories and we need to continue learning from them and come together and express solidarity with each other, and fight for justice. These are not empty words. They are not cliches. They are things that are happening. And we are so grateful for you, Conrad, for everybody there, for Farouk's soul, for all the people who fought, who are known and not known, who are making this happen. And we will continue doing what we've done. We are educators, we are strugglers, we will come together. It's been a pleasure having you all. It's been a pleasure having everybody with us. And it's a pleasure to have people from Gaza, from Cuba, from all over the world join us. And this is not the last. So thank you. And until justice, venceremos. And good
See,
night.
Solidarity. Appreciate
thank
you all.
you. Solidaridad. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you all.